You won't believe how easy it was. The moment I decided to disappear, it was like slipping into the shadows, unnoticed. No tears. No final confrontations. Just gone. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a cry for help. It wasn't a revenge plot. It was a choice, my choice. And in the end, nobody even cared. Let me start by telling you something strange. I didn't have a moment of realization, like those stories where everything clicks and you suddenly know what you need to do. It wasn't like that. No, mine was more of a gradual build-up, a slow erosion. The sense that everything I did, everything I said, every effort I made, simply dissolved into the air, like whispers carried away by the wind. It wasn't always like that. There were times I felt seen, heard, needed. And maybe, somewhere in those moments, I thought the world could stay that way forever. But then things change, don't they? Here's the part you'll never expect. The first step in my disappearance wasn't something I did. It was something I stopped doing. Sounds strange, right? But stay with me. It all began with the phone. That stupid, glowing screen that controls our lives. It wasn't a new phone or a specific app. It was the notifications, the constant flood of texts, calls, emails, messages, all of them coming from people who assumed I would always be there to answer. But one day, I stopped answering. Not out of malice, not because I was angry, but because I realized something. Nobody really noticed when I didn't respond. It wasn't just the phone either. It was everything. It was the conversations I used to have with friends, the small talk with coworkers, the interactions I thought defined my relationships. I could feel it slipping, like sand through my fingers. But I didn't stop it. I didn't try to hold on. In fact, I did the opposite. I leaned into it. I allowed myself to fade into the background. No one noticed at first. It was subtle, just like when you walk into a room and the lights are dimmed a little more than usual. You don't notice at first. But after a while, the darkness becomes familiar, comfortable. I didn't disappear overnight. But by the time the weeks passed, I was no longer a part of anyone's thoughts. I had once been the guy who made plans, who checked in with friends, who organized the dinners and the hangouts. But somewhere along the line, I stopped. The invites stopped coming, the messages stopped pinging. Everyone else was too busy to notice, or perhaps they didn't want to notice. The strange thing is, I didn't even mind. At first, it was a relief. No pressure, no expectations. It felt like a weight had been lifted. And that's when I realized, maybe I'd been disappearing for a long time without even knowing it. It wasn't just the people around me, either. It was my own reflection. I'd wake up in the morning, stare at myself in the mirror, and wonder, who is this person? The person looking back at me was a stranger, a ghost of the person I used to be. I couldn't remember the last time I had laughed until my stomach hurt or felt that rush of excitement about something simple, like a good movie or a conversation that lasted until sunrise. Instead, all I felt was a dullness, a void. And here's the most disturbing part. I didn't care. I stopped caring. I realized something even stranger during this time. As I became less visible to others, I became more invisible to myself. The idea of leaving didn't seem like an impossible feat. It didn't even feel like a loss. I wasn't angry or bitter. I wasn't looking for sympathy. It was more like I was simply observing my life, watching the events unfold like a movie, knowing I wasn't the protagonist anymore. It was almost peaceful. The first time I thought about actually vanishing was a quiet Thursday night. I sat in the dimly lit living room of the apartment I shared with Lena. She was across from me, scrolling through her phone, tapping away with a faint smile on her face. We didn't talk much anymore. I had been noticing it for weeks, the way she would sit across from me, absorbed in whatever was on her phone, the silence stretching between us like a cold blanket. I thought about saying something, maybe asking her how her day was, maybe saying anything at all, but I didn't, and it didn't matter. She looked up for a brief moment, glanced at me, and then went back to her screen. "You good?" she asked, almost mechanically. "Yeah," I replied, with a tight smile. "Just tired." We both went back to our own separate worlds. I didn't need to say more because, deep down, I knew the truth. We were strangers in the same space. It wasn't just Lena. It was everyone. Friends, family, co-workers. No one truly saw me anymore. But that wasn't the most terrifying part. The most terrifying part was realizing I didn't need them to. So, on that quiet Thursday, I decided something that would change everything. I didn't need a grand plan. I didn't need to leave a note or make some grand statement. I didn't need anyone to understand. All I needed was the quiet comfort of knowing that I was already gone. I wasn't angry. I wasn't looking for revenge. I didn't want to hurt anyone. I just wanted to see if anyone would notice if I slipped away, if I vanished without a trace. And so, I started planning. It wasn't anything crazy. Just little things at first, quiet decisions, like not showing up when I was supposed to, disappearing when the phone calls came in. I was still here, in my own body, but the more I faded into the background, the more I felt like I was becoming something else. I was becoming invisible. The strange thing? No one seemed to care. I could feel the change creeping up on me. It wasn't anything I planned, not at first. It started with small choices that seemed insignificant, but they were the first cracks in the facade of my life. The first time I ignored a call, it felt strange. Then the second time, it felt like a relief. By the third time, I didn't even think twice. The phone buzzing with messages, the texts piling up, nothing felt important anymore. Nobody seemed to notice that I wasn't responding, and that was when I began to realize something startling. I didn't need to be here. I had spent my life trying to fit in, trying to please everyone around me. But now, when I stepped back, it was as if the world was moving on without me. The strangest part? I didn't feel abandoned. I didn't feel lost. I felt free. The pressure of always being on, of always responding to every demand, was slowly lifting. Every text I ignored was like shedding a weight that had been holding me down for years. That night, after Lena had gone out again, I sat alone in the living room. The silence was heavy, but oddly comforting. I thought about her, about us. She had stopped asking how my day was, stopped even glancing at me when I entered the room. It wasn't malicious. It was just the way things had evolved. It had become easier to be two strangers sharing a space than to pretend that everything was okay. I looked around the apartment, the place we had built together. It used to feel like home, but now, it felt more like a cage. I wasn't angry at Lena. I wasn't mad at anyone. I was just tired of pretending. And that's when I realized, this was it. If I disappeared right now, would anyone care? Would anyone even notice? I don't know why that thought took hold of me so strongly, but it did. It wasn't a dramatic moment. It wasn't an emotional breakdown. It was just a thought, a question that lingered in the back of my mind, growing stronger with each passing day. The decision to vanish wasn't made out of bitterness or rage. It wasn't an act of defiance. It was simply the realization that I had become irrelevant, not just to Lena, but to everyone around me. It wasn't a choice I made consciously. It was just the natural progression of my life. I had been fading for so long that I didn't even need to make a grand exit. All I had to do was stop showing up. And so I did. I didn't pack up my things or make a grand gesture. I didn't leave a note or make a scene. I simply let myself fade into the background. I stopped answering calls. I stopped showing up to places. I stopped pretending. The funny part? No one seemed to notice. Lena went on with her life. Friends didn't reach out. And family? Well, they assumed I was just busy. It wasn't out of cruelty. It was out of apathy. People didn't care about me the way I thought they did. They didn't even notice when I became a ghost in my own life. And in that silence, I realized something that would change everything. I had always been invisible. It wasn't long before I noticed how easy it was to just disappear. I thought about it constantly, but never in a dramatic sense. It wasn't like I woke up one morning with a bold plan. No, it was quieter than that. Every day, I sank deeper into the background, letting the world move around me as though I was just a shadow. Lena continued with her routine, work, gym, friends, and I continued with mine, solitude, silence, the occasional glance at my phone. No one noticed when I didn't show up. No one noticed when I didn't reply. At first, I'd hoped that someone, Lena, maybe, would reach out, would ask me what was wrong. But she didn't. It was as though I had become as unimportant as the empty space on the couch beside her. She didn't even seem to care when I started missing dinners. It was like my absence didn't matter. I'd ask myself, did it ever matter? And that was the kicker, the thing I couldn't stop thinking about. My absence wasn't being questioned. Not by her. Not by anyone. I could have slipped away completely, and the void would have remained undisturbed. There was a certain peace in that, but also something unsettling. The thought haunted me. If no one notices, am I even here? Am I just a name on a list, a faint outline on the edge of the picture? A person who once existed but no longer mattered? The days blurred together. Every time I checked my phone, there were texts from people I hadn't heard from in weeks, and every time, I ignored them. I didn't have the energy to fake it anymore. No one seemed to notice the silence, the growing distance between me and the rest of the world. So, I allowed it to continue. One evening, after a particularly long stretch of days spent in isolation, I sat in the living room again, staring at the walls that had once felt so familiar. It was quiet, too quiet. Lena was out again. I knew she wouldn't be back until late. She had started going out with friends more often, or so she said. I didn't even ask anymore. I didn't care. But on that night, the silence felt different. It felt like an invitation. I thought about the past, all the little things I had done for her, for everyone, always trying to make things better, make things work, even when I didn't know how. I had spent so much of my life trying to hold on to connections, trying to make sure no one was ever left alone. But now, I realized something. No one was trying to hold on to me. It was liberating in an odd way. The weight of years spent fighting for a place in this world, fighting to be seen, fighting to matter, suddenly it didn't seem so important anymore. The truth hit me like a cold wave. I had been invisible for so long that I had stopped noticing it. But now, I was fully aware. And now, the question wasn't why am I invisible? But why do I need to be seen at all? I didn't need anyone to acknowledge me. I didn't need to matter. I was done with the fight. And that night, in the stillness of the apartment, I made a decision. Not a dramatic one, not an angry one, but a quiet one. I was going to let go completely. Not just physically, but emotionally. I was going to let myself fade away, fully and entirely. I had spent my life trying to fit in, trying to be part of something. But now, I realized that the only thing I needed was to be free of it all. It would be simple. I wouldn't pack a bag. I wouldn't leave a note. I wouldn't say goodbye. I would just disappear. The thought didn't scare me. In fact, it gave me a strange sense of peace. If no one noticed my absence before, they wouldn't notice it now. And that was when I understood, disappearing wasn't about the people around me. It was about me finally disappearing from my own life. I woke up that morning knowing it was time. Time for the next step. I had stopped answering texts, stopped replying to emails, stopped showing up when I was supposed to. The truth was, I didn't even want to try anymore. The realization was so simple, so obvious in its clarity. I hadn't mattered in so long, and no one even realized it. That was the hardest pill to swallow, but I had already begun to accept it. Lena hadn't noticed my absence. Neither had my friends or the people I worked with. It was almost like I'd faded out of their world without a trace, and they didn't even care. The worst part? I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I felt nothing. I thought I might be missing something. Perhaps some part of me would rise up and demand to be seen, to be heard. But no, that didn't happen. I simply existed, and even that felt like too much effort. The day passed quietly. I didn't do much. I didn't have the urge to fill the silence. It was already a part of my life now. I had started to become comfortable in it. A strange thought crossed my mind. What if I never left? What if I just stayed in this space, living as though I wasn't really living, until the day I finally did disappear? Later that evening, Lena came home late, just like she had been doing for the past few weeks. She walked into the apartment without looking up, her mind clearly preoccupied with something else. Maybe she thought I was in bed, or maybe she had just forgotten that I even existed in the same space. She dropped her bag by the door and walked past me without acknowledging my presence. No, hey, how was your day? No, I missed you. Nothing. I didn't feel hurt. I didn't feel anything. There was just this numbness, like I was watching someone else's life unfold in front of me. She didn't stay long. She barely even unpacked. The familiar rhythm of her routine, coming home late, checking her phone, preparing for tomorrow, was still in place. But I could tell, even without saying a word, that she wasn't aware of the space I had created around myself. The distance was now both physical and emotional, a chasm between us that had widened so slowly I hadn't even noticed when it became too wide to cross. It was a strange realization, but a freeing one. I was invisible not only to her, but to the world. No one was paying attention. No one cared. And I was beginning to see that maybe that was okay. As Lena went to bed, I sat there in the silence, letting the realization wash over me. This was it. I didn't need to make any grand moves. I didn't need anyone to understand. I could just vanish, quietly, and no one would even notice. And the truth hit me. I had been preparing for this moment long before I ever made the decision. I never planned it like this. The idea of disappearing wasn't something I had mapped out with careful precision. It just started happening, slowly, like a tide pulling away the sand beneath your feet until you don't realize you're already too far from shore. That's the strange thing about disappearance. It doesn't feel like an event. It doesn't feel like an ending. It just feels like slipping into the dark. That night, after Lena had gone to bed, I stood in the kitchen, staring at the empty space between us. We had shared this home, this life, for years, but it was now just a house, a collection of walls and furniture. Nothing more. I had become a fixture, like a forgotten painting in the corner, gathering dust. It wasn't even sad. It wasn't bitter. It was just quiet. I thought about the life I had built, or the life that had been built for me. I had followed the path laid out by everyone else: family, friends, society. I went to school, I got a job, I fell in love. And somewhere along the way, I had gotten lost. I wasn't even sure when it happened. But one day, I woke up and realized that I didn't know who I was anymore. I had been living someone else's life, someone else's expectations, and the worst part was, I hadn't even cared enough to question it. I looked at my phone. There were messages from friends, from colleagues, even from Lena. The same questions, the same polite exchanges. How's everything going? We should hang out soon. Missing you. But it all felt so empty, so hollow. None of it mattered. I didn't respond. In that moment, something inside me clicked. There was no dramatic decision, no sudden urge to get even. I wasn't leaving out of anger or spite. I was leaving because I had spent so much of my life being visible to everyone but myself, and I had finally come to the realization that my existence didn't have to be validated by anyone. I didn't need anyone to care because I was done caring. I didn't pack a bag. I didn't leave a note. I didn't want to make it a spectacle. Instead, I just went to bed, knowing that by morning, everything would be different. When I woke up, I felt lighter. The silence was comforting, not suffocating. I had already decided that I wouldn't wait for anyone to come looking for me. If they didn't notice my absence by now, they never would. So I did what felt right. I disappeared. I didn't leave the apartment immediately, though. I stayed in the background, watching as Lena went through her morning routine, oblivious to the fact that I was no longer fully present. She got ready, checked her phone, grabbed her coffee. She didn't even look at me. I could have called out. I could have said something, anything, to break the silence. But I didn't. I let her move through the motions, like she always did. And when she left, I didn't follow. I stayed behind, in the space we used to share, and I waited. I waited for someone to notice. But no one did. The first few hours felt surreal. I stayed in the apartment, in the same bed, in the same room, surrounded by all the things that had once felt like mine. But now, they felt foreign, as if I was just a visitor here, a ghost observing life from the outside. Lena had left for work, as she always did. There was no goodbye, no acknowledgement that anything had changed. It was as if I had become a piece of furniture she had stopped noticing, a lamp in the corner, a chair that no longer served any purpose. I didn't feel the need to leave right away. I wasn't in any rush. What was the point? No one was looking for me. No one was expecting anything from me. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't bound by obligations, expectations, or the need to be seen. The idea that I could just exist, without being noticed, was both terrifying and liberating. I sat on the couch, scrolling through old photos on my phone. There was a time when I would have been excited to share these moments with someone, to reminisce about the good times, the trips, the smiles. But now it was all just static. Faces that no longer held any meaning. Friends who had stopped texting because I stopped replying. And then, something caught my eye, a text from Lena. It was simple. Hey, we need to talk tonight. It wasn't unexpected. Lena had been distant for weeks, maybe months. We hadn't truly talked in what felt like ages. The text was just another attempt at pretending that things were still fine, that things could go back to what they once were. I didn't respond. Not out of spite, but because I knew something deep down. Whatever talking we were going to do wouldn't change anything. We were too far gone. I had already made my decision. There was no going back. As I sat there, I felt the weight of the silence around me. No music playing, no voices in the other room, no background noise to fill the space. It was just me and the hollow echo of a life I no longer belonged to. It was a strange, eerie feeling, like standing in a room where the lights have been dimmed and the door has quietly closed behind you. leaving you alone in the dark. A few hours passed. I didn't feel like eating. I didn't feel like doing anything. I was simply waiting for the next moment, the next choice. There was no plan. I didn't know where I would go or how I would leave this life behind. But the idea that I could simply vanish, slip away unnoticed, was oddly comforting. And then, just as the sun began to set, Lena came home. She didn't seem to notice anything was different. She walked in, her steps tired, her eyes fixed on her phone. Her usual routine, unlocking the door, throwing her bag on the counter, played out in front of me like a script I had already memorized. She didn't even look up at me. I could have been anyone at that moment. She sighed, dropped her keys, and muttered something under her breath about work. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I had already slipped into the background. Lena glanced up for a second, her eyes scanning the room. She paused, then looked at me, but not with any real recognition. "You okay?" she asked, her voice distant, almost automatic. I nodded, the smallest of gestures. She nodded back, and that was it. That was our conversation for the day. No more questions, no more pretense. The connection between us had thinned so much that this simple exchange was all that was left. She walked into the kitchen, and I just sat there. My body was in the room, but I was already somewhere else, somewhere far removed from this place, from these people. I wasn't living anymore. I was just existing. When Lena went to bed that night, I didn't follow. I didn't even move. I sat in the darkness, letting the reality of the situation settle in. I could walk out right now, grab my things, and leave without saying a word. No one would stop me. No one would even notice. I wondered how long I could keep this up. How long I could remain a ghost in a life that didn't care enough to call me back. The days blurred together. I was no longer counting time by hours or even by the calendar. Time had become irrelevant. Every morning, I would wake up to the same silence, to the same emptiness. The apartment was unchanged, yet everything felt foreign. Lena still came and went, her life carrying on without a second glance toward me. I had become the invisible man, a shadow in the background of her existence. One night, something shifted. It wasn't a big moment. No dramatic revelation or confrontation. Just a subtle feeling that maybe I had finally crossed a line. I had been in the kitchen, mindlessly making tea, when I heard Lena's voice from the other room. It was faint at first, as if she were speaking to someone on the phone. I hesitated for a moment. The voice became clearer, and I heard her say, "I don't know what happened. I feel like he's not even here anymore. Like he's already gone." The words hit me like a slap, even though I knew they were true. I had been slipping away for weeks, retreating into a silence that she hadn't noticed until now. Her voice trembled slightly as she continued, "I don't know if I can keep doing this. It's like he's just not there. And it's not even about me anymore. It's like he's disappeared into himself." I froze. The realization hit me harder than anything before. Lena had noticed. She hadn't acknowledged it before, but now, she was speaking about it as if it had become undeniable. The gap between us had widened to a point where even she could see it. But the strange thing was, hearing her say it didn't feel like victory. It didn't feel like anything at all. It wasn't the response I had expected. It wasn't relief. It was just emptiness. A hollow feeling that settled deep in my chest. She wasn't angry. She wasn't searching for answers. She was just resigned. I put my cup down, my hands trembling slightly, but I didn't go to her. I stayed in the kitchen, letting the words hang in the air. I was ready to leave, to disappear completely, but for the first time, I felt the weight of what I was doing. I had already been gone, but hearing her say it aloud made it real. It made me question whether disappearing was really the solution. Would anyone truly miss me? Or was I just another ghost, already forgotten before I even had the chance to leave? The next morning, the silence felt different. It wasn't the usual emptiness, the kind that had settled over the apartment like dust. It was something else, a stillness that held possibility rather than resignation. The walls didn't seem as suffocating as they had before. I stood in front of the mirror, staring at myself for a moment longer than usual. It was almost like seeing me for the first time in a long while. Lena was still asleep, the soft sound of her breathing drifting from the bedroom. I could hear the world outside, traffic, birds, distant voices, everything going on, as it always did. But this time, I didn't feel disconnected from it. I didn't feel like I was floating, untethered. It was like I was finally starting to see myself again, not as a shadow in my own life, but as someone who could still make a choice. I didn't leave. Instead, I took a deep breath and decided to try something I hadn't done in months, talk. Not the hollow conversations or the empty pleasantries, but something real, something honest. When Lena finally woke up, I was already in the living room, sitting on the couch, waiting. She came out, her eyes still heavy with sleep, and for a moment, she seemed like a stranger. But then I saw it. A flicker of recognition. A spark that hadn't been there in a long time. I didn't say anything at first. I just looked at her. And then, slowly, I spoke. "I don't know how we got here," I said, my voice quieter than I meant. "But I think I've been hiding from you. From everything." She didn't respond right away, and for a second, I thought maybe I had made a mistake. But then she sat down beside me, closer than she had been in weeks. Her hand brushed mine, and the touch was like a bridge being built between two people who had forgotten how to communicate. "I've noticed," she said softly. "I've noticed you pulling away." But I didn't know what to say. I didn't know if you wanted me to notice. And for the first time in months, I felt like I was seen. Not as a ghost, not as someone fading away, but as a person. A person with feelings, with fears, with a desire to connect. We sat there in the quiet, just being with each other for a while. No expectations, no pressure. Just two people, trying to figure out how to find each other again. I didn't need to disappear. I didn't need to leave. What I needed was to remember that I still had the power to choose to show up, to be seen, and to be part of my own life. Things didn't magically fix themselves, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like there was hope. The silence between us wasn't a barrier anymore. It was a starting point. And in that moment, I realized something. Maybe disappearing wasn't the answer. Maybe all I needed was to return, to myself, to her, and to the world I had been hiding from. And just like that, I started to exist again. Not as a shadow, not as someone forgotten, but as someone who was ready to live, to be seen, and to be a part of something real. The vanishing was over. And maybe, just maybe, I had finally found my way back.